G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to War Thunder with Mags, and welcome back to the 1.81 dev server. This is dev server number 3, and today we're going to be having just a quick video going over, or revisiting the flight models for the helicopters, because there have been some significant changes, and for the most part I'm pretty positive about the whole thing. So, today I'm going to run through pretty much exactly the same set of tests as I did last time, so you can see the difference between the flight models. Now, the first thing I noticed about this new flight model is the engine RPM is now tied directly to the collective. If you lower collective, the engine RPMs will start to drop, which is not something that should actually happen. When you raise the collective, the engine RPMs will increase. If you raise the collective too fast, you actually run an issue where you don't have rotor RPM, but you're trying to apply power, and you get problems. Now, for the most part, this didn't affect my ability to fly the helicopters. It was just odd. I think this has probably been done to take a control out of the equation. You don't have to worry about controlling engine RPM, but it's just something to keep in mind. Now, we're starting off with the same rocking test that I did before, and you'll notice that this time the helicopter is not sitting on the ground trying to rotate down the central axis of the fuselage anymore. As I'm moving the Skylake back and forth, the rotor is now pulling the helicopter, and the helicopter is rotating on its skids, which is, well, it's much, much closer to what actually should be happening if you were to try this. And the same goes if you do a forward rocking test. It's rocking in much the same way. Now, I should add that there is now a definite feeling of mass as well. The helicopters in the previous flight model didn't feel very weighty. They felt like there wasn't much to them. Now there is definitely a feeling of weight. And to top it off, they've also fixed the landing issues. There is now definitely friction between the skids, unless you've got unless you're moving at a fair kip. When you put the skids down, you will actually stop now. You won't slide around like you're on an ice skating rink. Now, while I'm sure tinkering with the mass numbers or the weight numbers for the helicopter and actually giving it a bit of a heavy feeling about it have probably helped with the landing, considering that aircraft still slide around like they're on an ice skating rink, they've definitely done some work here. I'm hoping whatever work they did here may actually get transferred over to aircraft for when they're on the ground as well. Now, flying the helicopter around, it is now flying far closer to what I would expect. Now, to be clear, this isn't a simulation flight model, and I was never asking for it to be. In the previous video I did a comparison against DCS. That was only because I don't actually own a Huey, a real one, that I could fly around for you and show how it should fly. I needed something to compare against. This, however, is a very good arcade flight model. If I give you an idea of the feeling, it's actually probably fairly similar to the Armour flight model. The standard flight model, not the Pro flight model for Armour. Now we're going to throw it into a hard right-hand bank here at almost 200 kilometers an hour, and you'll notice this time with speed on, we're not immediately losing altitude. It's not until our speed starts really dropping that the helicopter begins to slide sideways. So the momentum in a bank is now being taken into account. If you've got enough speed on and you throw it into a violent turn, you are not immediately going to fall out of the sky, which is how the helicopter should actually fly. That being said, I still don't recommend trying that again at slow speeds. You will immediately fall out of the sky because you're just not going fast enough to pull the maneuver, but that is how it's meant to be. And I'm about to do another tilting test. I'm going to pick up a little bit of altitude here and then tip the aircraft over at a very slow speed, and you'll see it falls as it should. So, yeah, overall I'm pretty happy with this flight model. This is, well, it's a close enough representation of how a helicopter should fly. There is a couple of things that are obviously not present in the flight model, however. First things first, all the nasty effects that helicopters actually have are not present anywhere in the flight model. I'm talking about things like VRS or vortex ring state, mast bumping, flapping, all the fun stuff that will cause your helicopter to have a very, very, very bad day very quickly and make you scramble to try and recover if it's possible to recover at all. None of this is modelled, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, I never expected any of it to be modelled because, well, just pause and picture people trying to fly in War Thunder with just alone vortex ring state being modelled. Every time somebody backed off the engine power or backed off the collective a little bit and tried to drop a little bit of altitude, they'd suddenly find themselves dropping like a rock straight into the ground, and they'd have no idea why. And it would be awkward to deal with a VRS situation under mouse controls, which is how the majority of people are going to be playing. And I did do some mouse aim tests, which I'll be speaking about in a moment as well. So yes, none of this is modeled at all. Now, you can do auto-rotation landings, mainly because the helicopter doesn't actually fall all that quickly to begin with. However, it does fall faster in this flight model than it did on Dev Server 1. On Dev Server 1, you could drop the collective straight to 0, turn the RPMs off, shut the engine off if you wanted to, and the helicopter would just slowly and gently float down to the earth. Now, well, I'll be honest, it still doesn't head towards the ground all that fast, but the helicopter is likely to break when it actually hits the ground, where in the previous flight model it would touch down pretty much undamaged. So, yeah, that's a change in the mass. But yeah, you can try and pull off an auto-rotation landing if you actually get critically hit, engine shut down, and you want to try and save the aircraft rather than just jaying out and spawning back in. So, once again with the landing, and as you can see, it just sticks nicely, providing you don't have too much momentum on. So, normal landings are fine now too. So, well done Gaijin. This is far more like what I was actually expecting in the first place. This is perfectly fine for War Thunder purposes. Now, having got the flight model right, let's flick over to some gameplay, because I do have a couple of things that I've noticed there. Well, I say noticed, but the truth of the matter is that these are problems that exist with all the vehicles that are in War Thunder, but are very notable issues that helicopters are going to have. Now, the first is spawn points. As you know, there are spawn points over the map in War Thunder. Usually, at least one, usually two, on each team. Now, these spawn points are entirely predictable. Every time you bring a new vehicle into the match, you're going to show up at one of these 2 points. It's entirely predictable, and for aircraft it's actually a major issue because the spawn points are mid-air, and once people have learnt their locations, which the vast majority of people flying jets on in the beta already have, yeah, you can see where I'm going with this. Once people worked out exactly where the helicopter spawns were going to be showing up, there was always 2 or 3 MiG-15 Sabres, pick your preferred jet, in the sky, constantly circling around, watching the points. And once a helicopter was spawned in, they would hit it immediately. And because of the speed involved, there's very little you can do. So camping the spawn point for helicopters is going to be a major issue. I can see it becoming part of the new meta of the game once helicopters are in, for somebody to bring out a jet just to camp the enemy's helicopter spawn sites. That's all they will do the entire match. They will not drive a tank beyond what is required to actually get an aircraft in the air, and at that point they will do nothing but watch the helicopters and make sure the enemy team cannot get any at any time. Which is, yeah, a bit boring to be perfectly honest. Now, I'm sure there's going to be a few people that are going to be saying, but aircraft were always going to be a problem taking down helicopters. Well, not necessarily. If you manage to get away from the spawn site without getting spotted and get clear into some cover or some terrain, quite often, providing I was shooting and then moving and not just sitting on one point in the map constantly lobbing ATGMs at targets, making a pretty obvious target of myself, it was actually very rare for me to actually get shot down by an aircraft. Or, I should say more to the point, very rare for me to get shot down by a jet or, a fixed-wing aircraft. Once I escaped the spawn site, providing I kept moving around the map, fire an ATGM, maybe 2, and then shift positions, constantly keeping on the move, especially if there's a situation where I've clearly been spotted, as I just was, fixed-wing aircraft weren't much of the problem. Rotary wing aircraft, on the other hand, much more of an issue, because they're doing exactly the same thing, and they're likely trying to get into the same kind of places that'll make good firing positions as you are, and so you tend to run into problems with them. Self-propelled anti-aircraft guns as well, so once I got away from the spawns, playing it smart, I tend to find the Spags and the rotary wings, the other helicopters, were actually more of a major issue. So I don't think planes are going to be quite as devastating as people may think, at least providing you can clear the spawn. Now, another small issue, and this is only a minor one, is the downtime between sorties when you're flying a helicopter. Currently, as it stands, the base sits halfway between the runway and the main combat area, which is perfectly fine. That's about where I'd expect it to be. I was actually sort of expecting it to be at the runway itself, so this is much, much better, considering the slow nature of helicopters. Repair times are perfectly fine, that's not a problem again, it's a function of your repair crew and how quick that's actually going to go through. But the biggest issue is, surprisingly, turning your engines on. When helicopters go through and get a respawn after getting a repair and a rearm, they start with their engines shut down, and it takes about 60 seconds to actually get something like the Huey powered up to the point where you can actually get the skids off the ground. You know, between the time of the respawn and, you know, the time of actually taking off. And then you've got your travel time on top of that. So a return to base, getting a repair, turning your engines back on so you can take off, where all other vehicles start with their engines already running, and then return to combat area can actually take up to 4 or 5 minutes, depending on the size of the map that you're on. But most battles in ground forces rarely get above, 10 to 15 minutes at tops. So you're talking about a third of your total match time at absolute best, just flying back to base to pick up more missiles to return to combat. Time that could be spent in another vehicle. It's actually more economical at this point in time to just fire off your missiles if you happen to get a helicopter spawned in, and then immediately just J out and spawn in a tank afterwards, or an aircraft, or any other vehicle, rather than flying back, because the time to actually take it back, get it rearmed, and get it back into combat just takes too long at this point. Making the helicopter spawn in with the engine already started would help, but this is an issue that I'm not entirely sure how to address beyond that. So, leaving ground forces, now we go to the helicopter-only RB mode, which is currently set up as an event on the dev server. This was fun to play, but it does need a lot more work, which it is going to get. At least there's a whole list of things that Gaijin do want to add to this at this point that are currently not present. As it currently stands, it is meant to be a map of Vietnam. There are 2 spawn points per team, and there's a whole bunch of ground vehicles, and that's it. There's no capturable zones, there is no major grand objectives that you've got to go after, there's no VIP units, there's nothing else. It's just a bunch of ground units, convoys that are all moving towards the front line, as they do on most RB maps, stationary pillboxes and stuff, as you can see here, and helicopters. And while the very start of these battles almost always resulted in people firing at ground targets, that would only stay the case up until the moment that a helicopter was spawned, at which point the entire thing would turn into a helicopter airquake. So for the moment, it's nothing but air-to-air PvP between helicopters rather than between aircraft, but it does serve as a reasonably good way to actually grind XP for the helicopters. There is, of course, one small catch with the entire thing. There's no respawns. It's one helicopter, no respawns, much like normal air RB, which works fine in normal air RB. But these are slow-moving, by comparison, slow-moving helicopters equipped with turreted weapons that can fire 20mm and 30mm cannon shells in multiple directions and can track as fast as you can move your mouse. Yeah. Death is currently fast and frequent, with your time in a match often being as short as 2 minutes, and the rest of the time spent in queue. This is a game mode that most certainly needs a respawn system, and it needs a hard one, not a points-based one like what we see in tanks. There needs to be 3 slots available where you can put any 3 helicopters you choose in for the game mode, and you just spawn them out one after another. At which point that all 3 have been spawned, well, then you're out of the match. If a respawn system isn't actually put in here, I don't see this game mode actually lasting all that long. People will just get too frustrated at a combination of the length of the queues versus the time to kill. If for nothing else, the respawn system is needed to simply lengthen the time you are actually in the match. Now, as for trying to do anything but airquake, that is anything other than air-to-air PvP in helicopters, I don't actually see that happening either. We actually have a case study here in the form of Heliborn. You'll remember I covered that a few years ago. One of the major problems they actually had in their PvP modes, no matter what they put in the way of objectives, they put in sling loading, the ability to deploy mortar teams, and nothing. Nothing actually stopped players from wanting to shoot down other players in the match, completely ignoring the objectives on the map. I think you're going to see exactly the same thing here. Like, it would be really good to see the objectives inside of this game mode. I really look forward to seeing them. But I also really don't think they're going to change how people are actually playing the mode, and that's perfectly fine. Like, it was fun playing the Airquake. That's not actually a major issue. It's just the way it's actually going to be. The maps, however, with the objectives included, will be very interesting for custom battles, which I am very much looking forward to. So, really, that's everything that I wanted to cover here. Now, this is the third dev server. As a general rule, Gaijin rarely has more than 3, so I'd expect the patch to be dropping anytime this soon, possibly even this week. I did play around with the tanks, I did play around with the MBTs, I was using them to get the helicopters out. They were a lot of fun, but I reserve judgment on how well they operate until I can actually see them in a live environment versus the other live machines. I think they'll do well, but again, I want to see them there. That's really everything. Anyways, ladies and gents, hope you enjoyed the video and thank you very much for watching. As always, check the video description down below for links to my social media and my Twitch, my Patreon, and everything else. And until next time, remember to click that like button, share, and subscribe if you would like to see more. And as always, fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, even in realistic battle mode, the cannons get reloads in the air. The missiles don't, but the cannons do. Exactly the same as Hellborn reloads its cannons on its helicopters, but the missiles you've got to go back to base for. So yeah, there's that too. Anyways, take care.